Coming up next, a special edition of Nevada Week in Review. How did Nevada end up with the highest unemployment and foreclosure rates in the country? Why did our economy implode? And is it finally getting any better? We have a panel of economic experts who will provide a progress report on the status of Nevada's economy and what it will look like a few years from now. Nevada Week in Review is next. Welcome to this special edition of Nevada Week in Review. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the panel. Dr. Stephen Brown is director of the UNLV Center for Business and Economic Research. Dr. Robert Lang is executive director of the Lindsay Institute. Carol Villardo is president of the Nevada Taxpayers Association, and John Restrepo is head of RCG Economics. Welcome.
Hi,
all of you.
Thanks, thank you.
We have a lot of subject matter to cover, and hopefully we don't get too academic, but it's important to provide some data and some background and some history for our viewers, because as anyone knows that's lived here for any length of time, maybe even just 5 or 6 years, this was Nevada, particularly Southern Nevada, was the epicenter of the Great Recession. Everyone is calling it the Great Recession, mainly because, and you guys know far more than I do, it's going to seemingly take forever to get out of it. So my first question is I want to pose to you, how did we end up here? How did Nevada become the epicenter? What kind of factors came into play to cause such a mess?
Well, I think the simple answer is that our housing boom, which was fueled by financial innovation and loose monetary policy, turned into a housing bust really quickly.
And what caused that? Did people borrow that should not have borrowed, or people blame the so-called flippers?
Well, you could sort of say it's more complex than that, but it's just that there were houses being built faster than people were going to move into them. And when that happens, house prices have to collapse.
So we are about 65 or 70% underwater, I believe. So
about 65%.
Is it 65% you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say the other problem you had, too, with people coming in the way they were and buying the houses, Dr. Brown mentioned it, the financing became very creative. And with some loose financial rules, what you had happen was people qualifying for homes that in a normal economy would not have, and the loans that they were getting were ARMs. And all of a sudden, these balloon payments came up, and that was not going to work for them. So you had a chain reaction. It was not just that. There were world events that impacted us on tourism that we had no control over. For all of the ups and downs I've been through, this is the first time that what's impacted us has been outside of the U.S. borders. Because for the last time that the economy was so bad, we were the last ones in and the first ones out. And that was in that period from about 78 to 83.
But did we get overbuilt, maybe just on the residential side? I'm thinking about even the gaming side. I remember at the height of the so-called Great Recession, looking at City Center thinking, is this thing going to survive? I mean, it's actually probably a miracle that's even open today, because that was right at the height of all that bad economic news coming in.
Well, I think, if jump in for a second, Rob, I think the whole nation suffered a housing bubble. The question, that was not necessarily unique to Southern Nevada. It was unique to Southern Nevada. It was the growing popularity of the Las Vegas brand. We did an incredible job in the 24 years I've been here, particularly in the 90s, to promote Las Vegas as a place to come and visit. Everyone wanted a piece of Las Vegas, and so this growth fed on each other. There was issues of land availability, the demand for having a Vegas experience, cheap and easy credit. Remember, this recession is not in the typical recession. It was driven by a financial crisis, a credit crisis. Cheap and easy credit fueled the demand or supply of product, commercial, residential, based on a base of come to Vegas and have a piece of Vegas on a very narrowly based economy. consumer and consumption based. So it was a variety of factors that made this worse here than, let's say, in some other cities. And so there's a lot of things that came into play here in that regard.
The first business of Las Vegas was tourism, of course. The second business was building Las Vegas. And so we had as much as 12% of workforce tied up in areas like construction. And it wasn't sustainable. Now, the city had been on a 4-decade-long trajectory where it had grown from about 250,000 to 2 million. And so it's the newest large-scale urban space in America. And so it doesn't surprise me that there was a kind of a cliff that we went off, because no one told the region, this time we mean it, you're not gonna grow at that rate again. You're off on a different trajectory. And it was matched with a real estate bubble, which was fueled by cheap credit, no documentation loans. And the fact is that the country's whole trajectory was consumption in the decade. Let's borrow money, on our houses and then consume off that. And the U.S. writ large, had a problem in terms of declining exports and so on in relative terms to the share of the economy, the size of the U.S. economy. And Las Vegas was just a sort of poster child for both, for the over consumption and for real estate speculation.
And that consumption built on wealth and growing real income in real terms, right? Consumption based on growing credit and the availability of credit and cheap and easy credit. As they say, the working class moved to the middle class moved to the upper middle class based on debt, not on rising incomes on a real basis.
And
so
in fact,
that fueled all of this.
In fact, if you look at the time period leading up to the collapse, gaming revenues were growing faster than the U.S. economy here in Las Vegas, because people were essentially taking money out of their houses and coming to Las Vegas for vacation. Now we see gaming revenues are growing a little bit more slowly than the economy as a whole. And that's what we would expect, given that we're still in a recovery phase.
Well, what are the real jobless numbers? Now, we had a jobless report this week that the governor sort of put a positive spin on it, because statewide it looked a little improved, although in Las Vegas it dipped again. It wasn't as good, it wasn't as promising, the unemployment numbers here in Southern Nevada as it was in the rest of the state. And then you have the people that have quit looking for work, and they maybe left the workforce altogether. So what are the real figures? I know 11.6, 11.8, and then there's the 23%, 25% number right here. Where are we?
Well, if you take into account people who've left the job market or who are working fewer hours than they would like, the unemployment rate is probably about 22.5%.
Right.
22.5%.
22.5% at the state level.
Now that has to be the highest in the country still.
Yes.
For a state, it is.
Yeah.
There are pockets in
regions.
California,
there are
the
pockets,
Midwest.
Central
regions.
Valley of California.
But for a state, yeah.
But I mean, we have so many displaced construction workers. The largest share of this is in a single sector. It was the business of building Las Vegas, which we stopped building. And so, when you look at other categories like healthcare and so on, the numbers are, at median for the U.S. and so on, depending on the sector. So, it's really that we have this overhang of that construction boom.
And it's really, you got to be careful, as everyone knows, at the table with the unemployment number, how that's calculated based on the household survey and all those sorts of things. We always prefer to look at job growth. Numbers of jobs produced month over month, year over year, and we're still struggling compared to where we were prior to the recession. Until we see robust or healthy job growth, in our opinion, 3,000 to 4,000 a month, consistently for at least 6 months, we're still kind of moving sideways and backwards and forwards in this recovery in terms of a job growth standpoint.
And Dr. Brown, you seem to think it's not going to be till 2017 until we really do recover.
Well, even the U.S. economy is running well below what
Trend
you might
rate.
consider historical growth rates.
Right.
And it looks like it's going to be 2017 before the U.S. economy even becomes close to operating in a way that it's a full head of steam. And when you sort of consider that we're actually doing worse in some regards than the U.S. economy, I think it'll be 2017 before we really see any meaningful recovery.
That's right.
It's kind of also amazing that the population boom, where every month 5,000 people are moving in and 4,000, 6,000, right around there. I understand, I believe this was your report, that we actually saw a population decrease in 2011. And that's got to impact all sorts of things, including tax revenue.
Oh, big time. Well, the whole issue, as has been identified by, I think, everybody, is we're a consumption-based economy. And once your tourists aren't coming in, you're not getting restaurant sales. Once people are being laid off, construction workers, you're not buying cars. You're not consuming anymore. Once you don't consume, and that's your largest part of your revenue for the state, and funds your local governments, it's the second largest local government revenue source, you've absolutely got a problem. And that's part of, I think, what the people at the table, I can't say that I'm in this group. I support the efforts, but that's the reason there's been so much discussion about not economic development this time, and I beg to differ with everybody. It's economic diversification. That's important because, and I should let the experts here speak to that, because we have been basically 2 to 3 economies. We have been a tourism economy down here. We have been a mining or land-based economy, mining, ranching, farming in the middle part of the state. And I think we look like 3 states sometimes, even because of the way we get our water. And then for the northeastern part of the state, actually we have a distribution, still semi-land based, with problems. They never grew up with gaming the way we did. So when you look at that and then you take a look at another state and the differences in what they have, the number of areas, all areas don't fail at the same time.
But how do you go ahead and foster diversification? Because we've been at the legislature a long time, and we've seen every single study commissioned and appropriated to look at how do we diversify our economy. I know, Dr. Lane, you brought up the fact that education is a key component. Is the education infrastructure a detraction? Is that a deterrent for economic development, diversification, companies coming into our state?
Yes. I mean, we have, for example, a city of 2 million. We have less outlays for R&D out of our university than Las Cruces. It's forget about Salt Lake and Denver and Phoenix. They're not our competitors. We're behind Flagstaff. We're behind Logan, Utah. UNR is behind New Mexico State. Not just, and that's the flagship. That was, we're supposed to be an urban research branch. UNLV is actually ahead in research outlays in Portland State. It's where the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is. Against our peers, we're actually not bad. But for a region the size we are, and to have no private institutions, providing an alternative to that, it's a relatively weak effort, and we've never really invested in any of the tools, any of the innovation tools that you'd need for diversification. And we've got some opportunities. You have, for example, a gaming industry that could spin off a world-class IT sector and is doing so. But if you have no investment in the education infrastructure to exploit that, there's just a missed leveraged opportunity. Places like New York saw an IT sector emerge tied to Wall Street and to media, and they put an RFP out and put a tech university together. Cornell won the bid. Stanford was one of the bidders. That's what innovative places do. We're at risk.
Well, it's like the chicken or the egg. Does the education come first, or do the corporations come first? Is that something for students?
You need a blending. You can't work with either one, because when you talk about education, particularly the way we're structured, we're relying on UNLV, UNR, and then the community colleges, the state colleges that you'd like to build. You can't do them because they're state funded unless you have a revenue base. You can't have a revenue base unless you have business.
Most community colleges are locally funded, by the way. Only 4 states are with us.
And we're one of them.
And we're one of 4. And so, we're missing
but if you
partnership
take a look
opportunities.
At total funding, and obviously that is being done right now, so that may change. When you take a look at the total funding, though, whether it's local or it's state, the question goes back to Mitch, and it's got to be a balance. And somehow we get polarized, and we don't seem to be able to go between black and white and get gray, to meet in the middle.
Well, and there's a couple of things that sometimes is the elephant in the room, and that is there's a variety of factors that come into play, like everyone has said. There's also the issue of, particularly in Southern Nevada, the image we portray to the rest of the world, of the Sin City image. And for those who say, and I know my friends and the clients in the gaming industry don't like to talk about this, but if you don't think that has an impact, it does, in terms of certain types of companies coming here. There's also questions of how we've developed our workforce beyond the higher ed, and I think Rob is absolutely right. We have no competition from the private sector in a research university setting. There's no, USC here or Stanford, for example. They raise the level. But the whole issue of workforce development, how we're investing our workforce dollars, the state gets around $30 million a year, if I'm not mistaken, in workforce development dollars. How we've spent those dollars in the past. In the past, it's been training people in the casino industry to change beds and construction workers. It has not necessarily been spent in training a technical workforce, because not everyone's going to college, so we need to develop that workforce. I had an interesting conversation with folks from CSN the other day, and they have classes that are wanting more students in the technology. There's these technology classes, whether it's set design, whether it's network, and you work with Switch, the network, computer networks, and they go, we can't get these kids to sign up for our classes because they're afraid because they don't have the math background in high school to get into the associate programs we offer at CSN. So it's all linked together.
And if you look at the research on this issue, what you find is that the businesses that are creating the future through high tech or science or whatever, they tend to locate in places that have superb education systems. They have good K through 12 systems, and they have good higher education systems. So we're not as a state or as a county putting money in the things that attract businesses.
Right, and it's not only the higher ed folks, but it's the technology occupations.
Right. A quick path to diversification, though, just to answer it. We're only doing about 60+% of the medicine that you predict. We're supposed to, when we did the Brookings SRI study, you're supposed to have about 18% of the region's economy tied to medicine, based on our age, based on our wealth, based on the scale. We're just over 12%. That 6% is about the size of the construction industry in its shrunken form. It's mostly going to California. We're taking and consuming the most expensive consumer service from an adjacent state, so the physician lives there. They're not getting their hair cut. They're not buying a house. We're missing office space that we would have occupied, for example. That's not like brain surgery, economic development. That's if you just provided the medicine in Las Vegas that you would predict would be here at the scale, we would have a substantial share of our economy diversified in the sense that the portion that was just gaming would be smaller because we'd have a more diverse economy because we were providing our own services. Right. Just as a quick path.
But if we were to make a substantial investment, unlike any other appropriation in state history, into the education infrastructure, higher ed, K-12, K through 16, and you might argue that money isn't everything, but some would argue that money hasn't been tried. Why not give it a shot? Let me ask you this: is that enough to overcome the disadvantage that we have in terms of image? And Mr. Restrepo, you brought that up, that companies might hear about some R&D going on, they might hear about our achievement scores going up in K-12, but still it's Sin City, and that's how this city has always advertised itself.
And and it depends on the company, depends on the industry. Some it doesn't matter. But if it didn't matter, and that's what I say, if it did matter, like some of my friends say, it really shouldn't matter, because we have another message to sell, we wouldn't have the issues we had today. We wouldn't be the economic basket case of the country. We just have to do, but it takes time. Look, the good news is, although we're kind of a somber group today, the good news is, for the first time in my 24 years here, the community, the leadership in this community, the private sector and the public sector are talking about real investments in economic development, and real economic development, not economic development by slogan and soundbite and cheerleading.
So that's the real deal.
I think it is, because if not now, when?
Well, and I think
it's finally happened. But it's going to take time. Just quick, we're a city of quick fixes. Come to Vegas, you can win the mega bucks. So we have a culture of quick fix. This is going to take a long time. Transforming an economy and a culture is not easy. It takes a long time and a lot of willpower and a lot of investment, both time, talent, and treasure, as they say. So it's going to be a while.
But I think the other thing that happens, John, there is a silver lining, if you will, in the economy. Look at the discussions that are being held that would have never have been held before, just because we didn't have to have them.
That's correct.
When you look, and I can remember coming here and on vacation before I moved out in the 60s, and you could have a blackjack dealer who had a college degree but made more money from tips. Just so many things like that. So nobody felt an urgency or an immediacy to do something. we talk about technology now, but the reality is that the technology that has been embraced at this point is still relatively new. 20, 22 years old, and we were still going along with,
Right.
you know, this is what we need. So I think there's a marvelous opportunity, and if we don't take it, and yes, it may take us 5 years, but if we can continue to see the slow growth, okay, of jobs coming in, of dollars coming in from taxes improving, then we have the ability to build on that rather than trying to react to this tsunami of up or down or whatever it is. So I see a positive in that. I am not discouraged.
There's actually a couple of additional advantages. Housing prices are now depressed to the point where, from a housing point of view, this is a very attractive place to move. The second thing is that when you have a couple of sectors that grow really fast, that tends to sort of take the steam out of every other sector in the economy. And now we don't have sectors that are growing fast, so that makes resources available for uses elsewhere in the economy. So we have resources that are available for use, we have houses. You know, all we have to do is supply some of the additional pieces of the puzzle, and the state could look pretty darn attractive.
Yeah, I mean, how much could you have diversified when you were booming? I mean, it's like how much faster could the growth have occurred? The region went with, you know, with tourism, which seemed endless at one point. We're not even done with tourism. There are opportunities to do large events. We've never built an appropriate-sized venue. In most places, Brookings has this view that you know, stadiums are boondoggles. Here, they're part of the export economy because our stadiums would be filled by tourists. So, you know, there's even an opportunity to build a large-scale event center to program 15 or 20 more events in that we don't currently have. The Pac-12 championship came with all the rich alum from, you know, USC and Stanford showing up for the city for a party weekend, and package it and cross-sell. So even at the core economy, there's space left. So it's, you know, it's not that grim if you look at sort of the longer horizon.
We just have a few minutes left, so I did want to forecast at least for another 12 months or a year and a half or so. Taxable sales are up, and the state has about, Carol, I think you said 63 million more dollars than the Economic Forum originally predicted.
And it's also, remember, depending on which segment was reporting for that, it's between 9 and 11 months of revenue. We still don't have a full year, so, you know, Lord willing, it'll improve even a little bit more if we can keep inching up each month.
Tourists are coming in, air traffic, I think the volume is up. I think that was in your studies. Vehicular traffic, I think, is improving from Southern California. Tourists are coming back to Las Vegas, whether they're spending like we want them to spend.
They're spending a little bit less.
I think they're spending
gaming, they're
differently.
spending a little bit less.
So how have their habits changed in 10 years?
Well, the way they've changed, well, it's really since 2007, is they're gaming less, they're going to nightclubs, swimming pools, and they're shopping. Buying an extra swimsuit. You can't wear the same swimsuit.
At a day club, you got to change every day you're out
And they're
there,
from
I guess.
and they're from other countries,
Yeah, that's true too.
and that's been some of the growth.
Well, that's,
Go to the weak dollar. Yeah.
and now, so looking forward now, and you brought that up, that's a good point. We actually only have about a minute and a half left. How does the international currencies, the crisis in Europe, does any of that impact? Is those one of those external forces that are beyond our control that I guess could impact the U.S. economy and our economy?
Well, it's impacting exports right at the U.S. level, and it does affect, you know, if you're an individual family from Europe and you're having financial issues and there's joblessness and, you know, there's a lot of challenges, you may think twice about making that trip, or maybe you used to come to Vegas twice, you maybe don't come at all, or maybe you come once. So
And the
it
dollar's,
has an effect.
and the
at some
dollar's
level.
strengthening too.
The
which-
dollar's strengthening, which makes it more expensive too.
And there's definitely gaming operators that are making sizable amounts of revenue in other gaming jurisdictions like Macau.
But we hold 40% of the market, and so that's partly our wealth. In other words, if you're the headquarters and you have branches in places like Macau and somebody is gambling there, the wealth accrues to the management of the Sands Corporation or to Wynn.
Right.
So that's not, you know, a total loss. To Atlantic City, that's a total loss.
Right.
To Las Vegas, which is in the command and control position of worldwide gaming, those are outlets of our brand.
That's right. And while it may not allow us, while they may not be building new casinos here, allows for refurbishment and adaptive reuse and changing of the existing casinos, reinvestment, maybe at a smaller scale than we're used to, but a couple of $100 million, $500 million is still a pretty big investment. It may not be the $3 billion we used to see, but that, because of Macau, it comes back here and allows them to do certain things in Vegas to upgrade their properties.
We're selling professional services. We're showing them how to build green buildings at that scale. You know, so that's part of our, you know, economic opportunity.
Right.
Real quickly, we just have about a minute. I'm thinking again about the state. You have Clark County suing the state of Nevada for about $100 million they think that they're owed. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. How's that all going to play out, do you think? I don't want you to predict that particular case.
No crystal ball. You know, I've given up trying to figure out the way the courts rule on some of these issues,
but just
particularly the tax issues. It's a no-win situation, okay? If the state suddenly has to come up with that money and goes back to the county offsets some of their budget cuts, and the state is going to have to look at some more cuts.
We've got to leave it there. There could be cuts all the way around, just not North Las Vegas, but other municipalities. So we'll have to see. It's been a great discussion. It just flew by. That is all the time we've got left on this edition of Nevada Week in Review. I'd like to thank Carol Villardo of the Nevada Taxpayers Association, Dr. Stephen Brown of the Center for Business and Economic Research, Dr. Robert Lang with the Lindsay Institute, and John Restrepo with RCG Economics. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.